Hello everyone. Today we'll talk about what is random variable. But before we go to random variable, we should first understand what is random experiment or a random phenomena, right? So a random experiment is nothing but a process where we observe something uncertain, where some uncertainty is involved, right? Where you cannot say whether this thing will certainly happen or not happen, right? So for example, tossing a coin. You toss a coin, it could be head, it could be tail. You cannot certainly tell what outcome is going to come. So there is always an uncertainty involved. You can say that there is a probability of 50% that head is going to come or tail is going to come, but you can never be certain until it's a biased coin, right? So that experiment is called random experiment because there is an uncertainty involved with this. Similarly, rolling a dice, right? So if you roll a dice, any number from 1 to 6 can come. So it is also uncertain. Predicting whether it would be a rain on a certain day or not. So if I ask you, well, tomorrow will rain or not, you will say depending on some input, it may rain or it may not rain. You cannot certainly say whether it is going to rain or not. Similarly, a movie, whether it's a hit or flop, right? So this is also a random thing. It may flop, it may hit, depending on some uh, preconditions, but there is always an uncertainty involved. A new COVID vaccine, will it work or not? So it's an it's also a random experiment, right? So all these experiments where an uncertainty is involved, it is called a random experiment, right? Uh, so for any random experiment, uh, there would be some certain results that is called outcomes, and the list of all those outcomes, the set of all those outcomes, is called a sample space, right? So for example, when you toss a coin, there could be two possible outcomes, head or tail, and its sample space would be noted by head and tail into these curly brackets. So this is a sample space for tossing a coin, right? There could be more examples. So we can go through more examples and first understand whether you are able to understand it properly or not. Feel free to pause the video and guess the answer yourself, and then you can check the answer, right? So let's see in below examples what all things we have. First, rolling a dice. Is it a random experiment? Uh, so when you roll a dice, right? So we already saw earlier an example that we don't know what outcome is going to come. There's an uncertainty involved out of it. So yes, it's a random experiment. Then what would the sample space for this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. These are all possible outcomes that can come once you do this random experiment of rolling a dice, right? Next, drawing a card from well shuffled deck of 52 playing cards, right? Would it be a random experiment? And if it is a random experiment, then what would be sample space? Yes, it's a random experiment. Any card can could come. There is always an uncertainty involved in it. And the sample space could vary actually. If you only consider the face value, it could be ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, jack, queen, king. Or if you involve both of the things like face value and suit, then it could be like 52 out of 52 anything. Ace of spades, two of spades, king of hearts, anything. So this would be a sample space depending on how you want to read this, right? Let's see another example. Weather forecasting. Is it a random experiment? Yes, it's a random experiment, and its sample space would be sunny, cloudy, rainy, foggy, snowy, etc. Again, depending on how you categorize a weather uh, in your experiment, right? Let's see if you can get answers for the next example. Quality control, whether a product is defective or not. Is it a random experiment, right? So if you choose a product out of 10 products, will it be defective or not defective, right? So yes, it's a random experiment. You don't know. There could be some chances that it could be defective or it could not be defective, right? So its sample space would be defective and or non-defective. Only one of them can be an outcome of it. But certainly we cannot say whether this product is going to be defective or non-defective, right? Market research, survey customers for their product preferences, whether they like product A, product B, product C. So is it a random experiment? Yes, it is a random experiment. And if you look at this sample space for this, it could be they only liked product A, or only liked product B, product A and B both, product C, or none of them. So this is also a random experiment. Heating water at 100 degrees Celsius. So the question is, if if I boil 100, if I boil water at 100 degrees, what would happen, right? So is it a random experiment? If yes, then what was sample space? So no, it's not a random experiment, right? You guessed it right, because we know that water will boil every time when it is 100 degree, right? So it is not a random experiment. Dropping a ball from certain height, whether the ball will go down or up, is it a random experiment? Yes. So you're right. It's not a random experiment because the ball will always drop downwards due to gravity. Again, you can argue that we need some more conditions, like whether it's on Earth or it's Moon or it's space. That would make this problem interesting. But in general scenarios on Earth, yes, it's not a random experiment. Cool. Thank you.